기자부대, hop on the beat!
When it comes to the plot holes in JoJo, one of the most frequently cited examples among fans has always been the man who saved Josuke. In Part 4, we see a flashback of Josuke as a child when he was sick during the events of Stardust Crusaders, when he was saved by a mysterious boy with a pompadour. Josuke chose to model himself after him, and this serves as the origin of Josuke's hairstyle and his overall philosophy. Many fans have pointed out that the boy never returned and was forgotten about completely. Others claim that this was even part of a scrapped time loop plot point that would have had Josuke go back in time to fulfill the events of his past. In my Debunking Araki Forgot Part 4 video, I went over this topic and the reasons why the time travel theory was highly unlikely. However, to this day, this still remains one of the most commonly talked about of the supposed plot holes in JoJo. Just like with my King Crimson video and my recent video going over Anasui's gender, I'd like to now go fully in-depth on this topic and hopefully dispel any of the misinformation that surrounds it. So in this video, I'll go over what we see happening in the manga, debunk the various claims people make about the scene, and finally go over what Araki's intentions here actually were. First, let's go over the events as they occurred in the manga. At the end of the fight with Rohan, Koichi mentions the story about why Josuke is so attached to his hair. When Josuke was 4 years old, he fell under the same illness that Holly Kujo did at the beginning of Part 3, brought on by the awakening of a stand in Jonathan's body. While Tomoko was driving to the hospital, they were caught in a blizzard and stranded on the road. Then a boy with a pompadour appeared and helped get the car unstuck. He was wearing a school uniform and his face was bloodied from a fight. Once the car was unstuck, they continued to the hospital. Josuke grew to idolize the boy and modeled his appearance after him. This is the reason Josuke becomes so enraged when anyone insults his hair. Now let's go over the various arguments people have when it comes to the story. The biggest claim out there is that Araki originally planned for Josuke to somehow wind up back in time in the blizzard, and that he was actually the one who saved himself in the past, creating a time loop. This is one of the most repeated fan theories out there, and I've been seeing it constantly stated by people whenever this topic is brought up over my past 8 years of being a JoJo fan. Like with a lot of JoJo misinformation, once enough people say it, it starts to be considered a fact. It's not hard to find some people even claiming that Araki himself admitted this was true. In reality, this is absolutely untrue, and nothing that Araki has said has ever confirmed this theory. However, there is a slew of arguments that people make in favor of this theory, which I'd like to debunk here. First, people claim that the existence of Bites the Dust is proof of this scrapped time travel plot, and that originally, this was the way that Josuke would have ended up back in time. As anyone who's actually read JoJo knows, Bites the Dust doesn't actually work like that at all. The stand as we know it only rewinds time by about an hour, and only activates under very specific circumstances. Also, the stand doesn't send a certain person back in time, but instead rewinds time completely to a certain point. So even if the length of the rewind was extended to Josuke's childhood, Josuke would just be there as a child, not as a separate person. However, those in favor of this theory just dismiss any of the arguments about it since they can just claim that at some point in early Part 4, Bites the Dust just worked entirely differently, and then was changed when the idea was forgotten or abandoned. So really arguing about this goes nowhere since they just dismiss it entirely. Another piece of evidence that people claim is the fact that the boy's face was bleeding. They say there's no possible explanation for this other than Josuke having been transported here in the middle of his fight with Kira. They even say that if we look at the final battle, Josuke's face has the exact same wounds. Well, first of all, if we do actually look at the wounds, they aren't even similar. Josuke's wounds from the final battle were also much more severe, and not just localized to his face. Also, despite this piece of evidence often getting brought up in tandem with the previous one I mentioned, it actually completely contradicts it. Somehow they believe that Araki stuck with the plan to send Josuke back in time so far into the story that he actually gave Josuke the exact same wounds as seen in the flashback after Bites the Dust was introduced. But as we know, Bites the Dust's abilities and limitations were already firmly established at this point. So they're simultaneously arguing that the plotline and the original ability was scrapped early on, but also that Araki still bothered to give Josuke the same wounds as if it was still going to happen. And of course, this entire argument is stupid since, like I said, the wounds aren't even the same. As for the idea that there's no other way Josuke's savior would have gotten those wounds, I think it's pretty apparent that these wounds are an indication of the boy being a delinquent. As a lot of people that watch anime probably know, the image of a high school student with a pompadour is a classic trope associated with Japanese delinquent students. And this specific look was considered popular in the 1960s to the 1980s in Japan. People seem to argue that the pompadour hairstyle is just so unique that it couldn't be anyone but Josuke. Really, it isn't, and that was a common hairstyle associated with delinquents at that time. In fact, in the manga, one of the common insults against Josuke's hair is that it's outdated, another point in favor of the savior having been a separate person who actually lived in the past. With him being a delinquent student, it's really no surprise that he could have gotten in a fight and beat up, and was just walking home when the weather took a turn for the worst and he found the stranded car. Yet another point you'll see people make is that his clothes are the same as Josuke's, even down to the individual accessories. The fact that people even make this argument is honestly confusing, since it's the most obviously false out of any of them. First of all, the basic outfit is obviously going to be similar since it's literally just a school uniform. People will go on to argue that the pins on the uniform are the same, proving it's Josuke. Well, let's take a look and see if that's true. Josuke's outfit consists of a school uniform worn with the chest open, with 2 giant pins of a heart and a peace sign on his chest. Then on his collar there's 2 hearts on one side and an anchor shape on the other. Now let's look at the boy in the flashback. He wears his uniform mostly buttoned up with no pins on the chest. Then he has 2 pins on his collar, one that's some kind of pen shape, maybe like a school logo, and the other being 3 lines similar to a Roman numeral 3. Pins on the collar of this style of uniform is actually quite common, and you see it on multiple different characters in JoJo. Even Koichi in Part 4, who wears the most normal looking uniform of the characters, has pins. So not only are the pins nothing like Josuke's, but the idea of him wearing pins also isn't some kind of smoking gun that indicates him being Josuke. Some people will defend this by saying that in the anime some kind of change was made and that there the pins are the same. This is untrue, since if we look at the anime and the manga, the pins are completely unchanged between them. Not only that, however, but these pins actually further disprove the idea of this being some scrapped time travel plot. As many people have pointed out, the Roman numeral 3 pin indicates that he is a 3rd year student, or in other words, a senior. Josuke in Part 4 is a freshman, making him a completely different age in Part 4 than the savior was at the time of the flashback. For those who aren't convinced, in Part 5 we can even see Koichi with a Roman numeral 3 pin. This part takes place in 2001, when Koichi himself is a 3rd year student. You can even find real-life examples of a pin or a patch that indicates a student's grade level on the collar of the uniform. Of course, the thing that people are often unaware of is that Araki himself has actually commented on this topic. In a 1994 interview, Araki is asked about it and says that it's just Josuke's memory, meaning it isn't coming back into the story. A lot of people, when you tell them that Araki himself has refuted the claim, will just argue that it was Araki trying to save face after Part 4 was over. However, this was not the case, and this interview actually comes from during Part 4's publication around the time of the Rock Paper Scissors arc. If Araki had actually intended to bring this back in some way, he clearly would have done so. It's also entirely unhelpful in these arguments to just hinge your entire point on a claim that Araki is lying in interviews. So what do I think was Araki's intention for including the scene in the first place? I think this is pretty clear if you look into what he says about the themes of JoJo. On multiple different occasions when asked to talk about the overall theme of the JoJo series, Araki always says things like it being about wonderful people who carry out justice with a pure heart, or an affirmation that humanity is wonderful. The boy who saved Josuke is a picture-perfect example of this theme. Just a completely selfless person that does a good deed. Seeing a complete bystander help him in this way is what defines Josuke as a character. Josuke, and by extension the boy who saved him, are the embodiment of the delinquent with a heart of gold archetype. and it's one of the main reasons that informs Josuke's decision to become the town's protector. Hopefully with this video I was able to clear up all of the arguments surrounding Josuke's backstory, and I hope that it helped people better understand the purpose of the scene and Josuke as a character. If you want to see videos on similar topics going over JoJo misinformation, comment your ideas down below. If you want to receive updates on new videos and chapters, join the Hum and Beat Discord using the link in the description. To receive rewards like Discord perks and some uncut videos, you can support the channel on Patreon. And finally, for future videos, subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching. This is the part of the video where I thank my $5 and up patrons. Thank you to Tony, the Owl God, Alex Ramirez, Doorbell, Monkman, Ashton Joseph Miller, Crayon, Jesper Jansen, Rigo Vids, Zukato, Shane Giger, Sentai, Pumpkin Doge, Morioh, Bailey Smile, Ali, Almighty Quarth, Oof, PBA SVG, Cowrie, Jojo Agogo, Tucker Gold, Halil, and Cake.